This is the review of the 2025 Rivian R1S. Now, we originally tested this car in 2022, but since then, Rivian has made a bunch of updates to this car that actually warranted us buying it again and retesting it. Now, Rivian is still a new brand to the market, and so you can understand why a brand like Rivian is trying to iterate really quickly, make big improvements, and what Rivian is also trying to do here is control the price. When we originally tested this car, we paid about $80,000 for the top version, and today, that same cost gets you actually less. They've also made a lot of updates to the vehicle platform itself. Now, this isn't a full redesign. The structure and the hard points and everything are still the same, but they've done things like update the electrical architecture to make it more efficient and simpler, reduce the part count, a new heat pump for the air conditioning and heating system that should hopefully make it more efficient. There are a bunch of other small tweaks and things underneath the skin that we'll get into. But if you really want to go deep into the Rivian R1S, make sure you use the Consumer Reports website to look at all of our test findings and results, and also compare the R1S to other electric vehicles and even other SUVs. But before we get into it, we bought a 2025 Rivian R1S Dual Max Pack. The base price is $82,900, and the larger battery cost us $7,000. We also got the Sound and Vision Pack, along with the air compressor for $2,850. And we got the silver color, which is the only color that they don't charge you more for, and we got the standard 22-inch highway tire. The destination charge was $1,800 for a grand total of $94,550, and the final assembly point is Normal, Illinois. Styling-wise, the R1S is pretty much the same as it was. You will have a hard time figuring out whether you're looking at the refreshed 2025 version or the original one. They updated this lighting signature up here in the front. The light bar is a little bit different. Headlights basically the same. They moved the turn signals around. They played around with the badging and things like that. And then you get to the back here, and again, they've changed the taillight design. They played around with the lighting elements here. And one thing that's kind of neat is when you're charging this vehicle, those light bars fill up essentially to indicate the state of charge of the battery. So kind of neat. While there aren't a lot of visual changes, there are a ton of changes underneath the skin. And one of the big ones is with the drivetrain. This is now a 2-motor driven vehicle, whereas the original one we tested is 4 motors. And Rivian is now designing and producing these motors themselves. You can still get a quad motor version, which makes 1,025 horsepower, whereas our 4-motor version made 800 something horsepower. Both of those numbers are ridiculous. And this version with the 2 motors makes 533 horsepower, which, okay, yeah, that's less than 800. It's certainly less than 1,000, but believe me, it is plenty of power, and it is plenty fast when you're driving it. They also played around with the battery size. The old one that we tested had a 129 kilowatt hour pack. This now has a little bit more battery capacity, 141.5 kilowatt hours. So that's helping them get 410 miles of range by the EPA. And this is basically the longest range version of this car that you can get. It's got EPA rating of 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour for this new R1S Dual. Our old quad motor version was 2 miles per kilowatt hour. That is a pretty big improvement from one model to the next. And lastly, I thought it was pretty cool. This one weighs about 300 pounds less than that quad motor version. So yeah, fewer motors, but the battery pack is a huge component of the weight on an EV, so even though you have a larger pack here, the whole vehicle weighs a little bit less. So you can see some of those optimizations coming out in the final product. And in terms of charging, it's kind of just so-so. It's not bad, but it's built on a 400-volt architecture where a lot of the industry at this point is moving towards 800 volts or these higher voltages, which makes the car, again, a little bit more efficient and faster charging. So when you're at home or using a level 2, it's got an 11.5 kilowatt onboard charger, which that in and of itself is definitely competitive. And when it comes to DC charging, it's rated for 220 kilowatts of max DC acceptance rate, which again, kind of mid-pack. The charge port is in the same location. It's a little weird to open from the outside. There's actually this little like dashed line area on the fender flare here. So you brush that with your finger, pops out and swings up out of the way. That's the same. You do have a button now that helps you eject the charging cable. Our truck still has the old SAE combination style port here, but most of these are now shipping with the Tesla style NACS or North American Charging Standard port, which helps with the integration when using Tesla superchargers. The cargo area hasn't changed from the original R1S. Opening this top part here, and then it's a split tailgate. So you have this line going across, and then pretty similar to a Range Rover, you lower the bottom half of the tailgate here. It gives you a little bit of a bench, you know, and then also this tailgate is just not quite as long. One of the benefits of the air suspension is because this vehicle has a pretty high load-in height, at least you're able to lower it a little bit using that suspension. Get in here and you can see the third row is currently upright, but you still have a pretty decent amount of space back here. One change they did make is this under storage well. They redesigned this slightly, a little bit more usable now. One thing that you don't get here is a spare tire. You can lower the seats, I think. Let's find out. All right, I can lower the second row seats. I think you got to reach in. That's a little bit of a miss here, and this tailgate is not helping me in this situation, right? Because now that this sticks out further, it makes it a little harder to reach these third row seats, but ultimately I can push them down. Everything goes flat, and you have a pretty large storage area. Rivian has always offered a pretty large and usable frunk, and that has not changed here. So there's a button tucked under here, and the whole hood opens up, and you have a really nicely finished front trunk. Again, this vehicle is lowered with its air suspension, but still you have to lift stuff up and over and put it in rather than more of a sliding motion, but still pretty good frunk here. Oh, and they even have stuff down in there. This is in case you eat a berry that you shouldn't have eaten. It's a first aid kit for you. I think this is your air compressor hose. Let's find out. This is like turning into an unboxing video. Oh, and your fix-a-flat, yeah, so there you go, there's your spare tire. You shoot that into the tire, probably won't work, and then you can use your air compressor to hopelessly fill your tire with a hole in it. And then that should be your charging cable in the other box there. Everything has a spot. All these bags are really nice. They're still giving you a lot of nice things as well, which you better get for $90,000. All right. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the door handles. One thing is the original R1S, these door handles, they really didn't respond that well to the key fob. They've pretty much fixed that. One of the biggest differences though is if you come around to the other side of the door and we have a button, electronically release, and we at CR genuinely don't feel that that's a great approach because it can be unsafe. There is a manual release, but it's not labeled and it gets pushed up into this dark area of the door. It can be hard to find. Beyond the door handle, getting in and out of the R1S is a little bit of an interesting situation. So when I open the door, right now it's in its low position, which Rivian calls kneel, and that really brings the sill height down, so I can hop right in. That puts the seat essentially at hip height, so it becomes more like a compact crossover in terms of getting in and out. It's pretty easy. Just for demonstration purposes, you can see how much different it is in terms of access. So we're raising up, still going. Okay, so right about there is its standard ride height. So that's a pretty noticeable difference. It raises the seat up quite a bit. And even though I'm taller, it still definitely makes a difference. And there are different ride heights and everything here too. So make sure you go into the settings if you own this and turn on that kneel mode so that when you put the vehicle in park, it'll automatically lower down. So even though it doesn't come with that cool Bluetooth speaker by default anymore, you gotta pay extra for that. One thing it does still have that's pretty neat is the flashlight that's stored in the door here. So, and it charges automatically when you put it in there and everything. So let's talk about the space in this vehicle. So it's a big vehicle, but it doesn't have the largest interior volume for a 3-row. I'm 6'1", and I have the seats set to basically where I could sit behind myself in every single row. I have just enough legroom here where my knees are basically brushing up against the back of the second row seat. Not the best third row in that way. So without moving the seats, now I'm sitting in the second row and my legs are up against the back of this front row seat. So again, you're gonna maybe be struggling to get enough room for everybody in tandem. I have decent posture otherwise. These second row seats recline and everything, but yeah, not the most legroom here. One thing that Rivian made some changes to are the controls in the back seat. So you have this display down here. They really added a lot of functionality here that, you know, might make it a little bit more entertaining, I guess, or at least functional back here in the second row. Fit and finish was a highlight of the original R1S and R1T that we tested. So it still all feels well put together, even more so than it did, honestly. You still have this kind of wood grain trim here on the dash, leather covered surfaces and stitching and things like that. In terms of controls, ultimately this is still nearly all touchscreen based. So even your climate controls, they're in here in the center screen. You get this kind of cool graphic here of the car, but ultimately while driving, you're dragging these vents around. You can't quite tell exactly where they're going to point. One thing that they did add, these presets down here. So I can say, and honestly, it's kind of a workaround for a not so great system to begin with, but basically I can put these where I want and then I can save it to a preset. That way it just makes it a little bit easier to change on the fly later. Other examples are they have some screens here, such as changing all the drive modes and everything. That's all located down here in the touchscreen. No volume dial or knob. You got to come here and do the little slider. So one of the more egregious things, if you will, are the fact that you adjust the steering wheel position and the side mirrors, at least initially, using the touchscreen instead of your traditional controls. Yeah, it's a little weird and kind of tedious to do compared to a lever and you just move it around. The worst one are the side mirrors, and to have to go in here and then use the thumb wheels and controls on the steering wheel to adjust them is just not an easy process while driving, and it's just not the greatest solution. You do have some physical controls for the gear selector and your turn signal and wipers and things. Those haven't really changed, and that's good. And then some controls here on the steering wheel that unfortunately are unlabeled, so you kind of have to figure out what those do. Even though we don't necessarily love this very much touchscreen forward approach, they're trying to make improvements, and yeah, you are limited to the hardware that you have in the car, but at least the software can make meaningful progress over time, and we're definitely seeing that here. I am glad to see that we do still have a driver's display here. Some cars getting rid of that entirely, but it's nice to see. And they do a pretty good job here of making things large and easy to see and read. I do have an issue blocking of information on the cluster due to the position of the wheel. So that's going to depend on where you personally put the steering wheel. But for me, I'm definitely blocking a lot of that information. One thing that they did add that's pretty neat, this button here that kind of looks like a retro wave sun. Press that, and electronically it dims the roof. So now it is opaque and I can't see through it, basically, and you're just not gonna get as much sunlight coming into the cars. Interior storage, you have a big tray down here on the floor. You get a little drawer down here. The cup holders are still hidden in the console here. You press it, they come out. 2 wireless chargers up here on the console. And then you still have the electronically actuated bifolding center console lid bin thing. You also get this storage bin under the front seat. No glove box. Keep that in mind if you're really wanting to put stuff in a glove box. You don't have that here, but there are a lot of other decent storage options around. We're out driving the 2025 Rivian R1S, and I want to start with the powertrain because that's definitely one of the most noticeable differences here, especially compared to the original quad or 4-motor version that we tested. This dual motor version, seemingly anyway, the name of efficiency, they have a clutch on that rear motor. As you're driving, you can basically feel almost lag is how it's perceived when you put in an input into the accelerator pedal. Depending on how hard or deep you push into the pedal, that rear motor may or may not engage. And when it does engage, you can really feel it. Basically, the smoothness of the driving experience is not really there compared to some of the other EVs that this competes with, and it's a bit less smooth than the original R1S. One of the other things that we really didn't love so much about the original R1S was the tuning of the regen system. And part of the reason for that was that you couldn't shut it off. And that is actually still true here. So no matter what, you will have to drive with one pedal, but they've at least introduced more regen settings. So right now I have it in standard. I can change it to low or high. And the low setting really just means that it won't be so abrupt if you quickly let off the throttle. Makes it a little easier to drive. Rivian says that they also made a lot of improvements to the suspension system, and that's definitely something we complained about on the original vehicle, is that it just doesn't ride that well. And that's even considering this still has the air suspension that we talked about, the adaptive shocks, and it even has hydraulic roll system, where instead of traditional mechanical sway bars, you have basically a hydraulic link between all the wheels, and you can do some pretty cool and unique things with that. And that's still here. Even though they've made some improvements, even with software over time, it's just not that good. The handling is kind of twofold. In some ways, it comes across really good, especially for a vehicle of this size and weight and height. But in other ways, it feels too darty, especially when you're at high speeds. It starts to legitimately feel unstable because the steering feels kind of light, at least when you're just trying to drive normally. Where those things do start to give you some benefit is that hydraulic roll system that we talked about means that the body doesn't really lean all that much, feels a little unnatural, frankly, in some ways, but ultimately the vehicle's responsive, especially at lower speeds. So the handling is, honestly, it's just a little bit weird. The steering wheel's just reacting a lot to the inputs from the road, and it became tiring over time. Visibility in here, it's not bad. You do look out over this pretty wide hood. A-pillars are reasonably thin. I do have good views out the sides. The rear windows are also pretty tall. It does get a little bit challenging towards the rear. Depending on where that second row is positioned, the headrest may block that quarter window back there. And then your rear window is a little bit short or narrow, you know, top to bottom. But this ultimately is a boxy SUV, so it does help in that regard. One thing that Rivian added here are adaptive driving beams, and we're starting to see these pop up in the US a little bit more and more. Basically what it means is your high beams can be on more of the time. And the way they do that is with these essentially segmented or pixelated LED headlights. They can turn off different pixels or LEDs within the individual headlight. So if a car is coming at you, for example, you shut off just the portion of that light that would otherwise be blinding that oncoming person or driver. And then you can keep the rest of the high beams on, helping with visibility and things like that. Noise is an area where they've definitely made some improvements. The motors do come across legitimately quieter. They're more isolated from the cabin, which is great. That being said, this is far from a quiet EV. You still get a lot of tire noise coming through, even with the highway tires, and wind noise is probably the most obvious one. You just have this upright windshield, and it's not as aerodynamic as some other vehicles that it competes against. And one thing that's unique to this vehicle that honestly was driving me kind of nuts is you can hear the air compressor for the air suspension running a lot of the time. You'll hear it buzzing back there, huffing and puffing as the truck's moving around and things like that. So you might hear some strange noises coming from the rear of the car. Another area where Rivian definitely put in a lot of work to try to improve is with their ADAS or advanced driving assist systems. So they have a level 2 driving system, which for us, that means the combination of adaptive cruise control and lane centering. They now have a hands-free version of that when you're in certain areas. And generally, in terms of its capability of maintaining its position within the lane and speed and all that, that's actually pretty good. Our biggest issue here is that it doesn't allow for what we call collaboration. So if there's a pothole or an obstacle or something and I have the system active, if I grab the wheel and put in my own input to try to avoid it, it shuts off and just goes into, you know, a standby mode. And the steering feels very heavy and like you're kind of fighting it. And we like to see systems that allow the driver to put in their own inputs without it necessarily disrupting the dynamics of the car or shutting the system off. Thankfully, it does have a driver monitoring camera, but we did find that you can cover it and ultimately still drive with that system on. And so there's some software tuning that Rivian could do to make that system a little bit more robust. And even though this is technically the base version of this car, it does come with all of the standard safety features that we love to see. Blind spot warning, rear cross traffic warning, AEB, and a bunch more as well. All right, no Rivian video would be complete without some off-road driving. So we are gonna take this up our rock hill. First, I have to go down it. So we're gonna do that first. This is one area where one pedal driving is super nice with an EV when you're off-roading, is you do not have to constantly modulate between the brakes and the throttle. It definitely helps just make it a little bit more accurate and easy to modulate. So let's put it in the all-terrain mode, why not? And then the ride height set to high. So then we're just gonna go for it. One thing that our quad motor R1S was able to do in the truck as well is because you had a motor driving each wheel independently, it was basically this really crazy version of traction control, and you could effectively lock the wheels together like a traditional locking diff or something like that. You don't have that same level of control here. I don't think we're gonna have any trouble getting up this hill. Pretty much just keep my foot planted and it does all the work for me. I haven't felt the tires slip even once. Oh, there's a little bit right there and we're over. And that's it, and we're up. That's the review of the 2025 Rivian R1S. They've made a lot of changes since we tested this vehicle 3 years ago, and it's a better vehicle for it. And I am glad to see them focused on trying to improve the efficiency of this vehicle. Now, there's definitely still some compromises in terms of ride and handling and certainly the controls. And unfortunately, but also not surprising for a new brand, the reliability of Rivian has been pretty rocky so far. Hopefully it improves in the future. So make sure you use the road test page on the CR website to find all of the test results and also a lot more detail on all the things that we covered here today. And you'll also be able to compare the Rivian against other SUVs and even electric three-row SUVs.